Hey, this is Senator Justin Reedy coming to you at the end of week 9 of the 2025 General Assembly session. Next week will be the week before crossover, so it'll be the busiest week of the legislative session other than maybe the last week of the legislative session, because next week is the final week before your bill has to pass and cross over to the other house to have any realistic chance of passing. Bills do pass after crossover, but it's a lot less likely to get passed. And so this week is a build up to that. It's been busy, a lot of long hearings and committee voting sessions in anticipation of a lot happening on the floor next week. Couple of big pieces of news that I was involved in this week. First of all, I presented on Thursday my legislation to stop Maryland from ever having a vehicle miles traveled tax that tracks your mileage, from ever mandating that for drivers. And the reason that's important is because there have been pushes for a long time internally in Maryland state government to have some sort of vehicle miles travel tax. There's some pilots going on that are voluntary, where people can choose if they would like to try doing a miles tracking device in their car or other ways of having their mileage tracked to pay tax. A lot of times it's for electric vehicles. Like, the idea is you could do that instead of paying the extra registration charge for an electric vehicle. But there's also legislation in the General Assembly this year that wants to make every vehicle that gets over 25 miles to the gallon do this VMT on top of already paying gas tax. And so there's the governor's big climate change plan that Maryland Department of Environment has, builds a lot of its funding for the future on the idea that we'll eventually be charging people a pollution tax or a driving tax. And so I have had this bill in quite often, and I think the time is just as important now as ever to say we should not have a mandated driving tax for two reasons. One is, in some states, they've talked about doing this as a way to have a tax instead of a gas tax. But in Maryland, we know that won't be how it goes. It'll always be on top of other taxes, and it will continue to hammer and punish drivers. The second issue I have with it is that it's very creepy, in my opinion. I don't want the government knowing, not just tracking my miles exactly where I go, because there's a way they can do it without literally GPSing you. But that even if the government is just keeping track of how much I'm driving, how far I'm driving, it starts to get into a lot of issues of privacy, and we start to get to a point where a coercive and very authoritarian, big government, progressive government will start to say, I think if you're driving more than a certain amount per year, we're going to punish you because you're driving too much. So I'm against it. I've fought on this issue for many years. We do have a problem with funding in our transportation trust fund. Our gas tax, as you know, goes up every year automatically with inflation. And so people will often ask me, well, how are we supposed to find ways to find additional revenue for our transportation trust fund, for our roads and bridges? And I go, well, we could start by not using over 50% of our transportation trust fund to subsidize mass transit. That's the first problem. Second problem is mass transit takes so much of our transportation dollars because we don't have fares that keep up with anywhere close to the cost of the mass transit system. You may not know this, but there's a term called fare box recovery that says what percentage of the cost of the mass transit system, whether it's Metro in DC or in DC and Maryland, or whether it's anything in Baltimore or bus services, what's the percentage that the fare recovers of the cost of the mass transit system? And it's never going to be 100% because you do have to subsidize mass transit to some extent. It's never going to be totally able to pay for itself. But we used to be up in the 30% range. We're now under 10%. So the fares that are being collected by MTA and these other transit operations, it's less than 10% of the cost. So we got to fix that, and we have bills in to try to do that as well as Republicans, to get that to be more equalized. But I'm against a miles travel tax, and we're fighting on that issue. Second thing I'll bring up to you that's happened this week is there is just introduced, and I did a video on it a little while ago, a bill dropped and got pushed right to the committees for a possible hearing and vote before too long, is a new sales tax on business-to-business services, a long list of services where if a business provides a service to another business, there can be a 2.5% sales tax. Maryland has never taxed services before, never taxed services, but all of a sudden this bill is going to, it's a $1 billion sales tax. And they'll say it's just business to business, meaning like if a business provides landscaping services or pest control services or IT consulting to another business, that there's a 2.5% charge on that. But we know, number one, first of all, it's going to hurt small businesses. It's not going to be good for small businesses. Many states don't have this kind of thing. But then number two, that cost gets passed on to you, the consumer, the customer, in the cost of the goods that you're getting from that business. It's another attempt to try to find money instead of doing what we ought to do, which is to cut spending. We need to cut the size and scope of the state government, cut back spending. As Republican caucus, we have a number of very common sense ways to shave off hundreds of millions of dollars in different places and put it together to resolve our budget deficit, which unfortunately continues to be projected to be even larger than $3 billion. So it's a lot to get done. But that's the fight here, is to say, let's get state government back under control. Let's get rid of vacant state positions. Let's cut back on spending. Let's cut back on things we're committed to for the future. Let's get our spending growth back under control. Maryland's the only state in the region that has these kind of problems. Every other state in our mid-Atlantic region, from whether it's a swing state like Pennsylvania or whether it's a red state like West Virginia or a blue state like Delaware, all of them are having budget surpluses or balanced budgets. We have this budget deficit, and there's an obvious reason why it's mismanagement, and we need to turn that around. And then my final thing I wanted to hit, and I know this is a long video, I'm doing my best. I know there was a large gathering of folks in Carroll County coming out to town hall meetings put on by the superintendent of schools. And I've updated you a couple weeks ago on the work we're doing to try to get flexibility, common sense flexibility in the Kirwan blueprint. We are working, our delegation has been literally every day we're having meetings and calls and conversations with, whether it's other elected officials, whether it's with the bargaining units. We're staying in touch constantly with the school system, with our local government, county commissioners. Really important that the issue really is the funding model from Maryland. The Kirwan blueprint is really the problem in the way that it silos money. We feel we're very close to some positive things that we can report on. We're getting a lot of cooperation. We feel good that we're on the right track to getting something accomplished that will help ease some of this burden and be able to stave off some of the worst of what we've been seeing as a possibility for cuts and moving people around in the school system. We'll have more detail when I can lock that in, but we are working on it closely every day, and we're feeling positive that we're going to get somewhere soon and be able to report that. But I did want to circle back and give an update because I know it's of great concern to so many. That was a lot. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you in Annapolis. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and I hope you have a great weekend. God bless.